Well, good morning. What's up, brothers? It's the Halter Man here. Nice to see you. Hey, we're going to dive back into James this morning. Thanks for giving me a week off to share some stuff that was going on in Portland, but we're going to get back at it and dive right in. This is one of the great wisdom books of the New Testament. So if you're maybe joining us for the first time or you haven't been with us very long, the wisdom books are really there to help us guide our lives in the way of Jesus. And remember, the point of wisdom is that it unbinds us, it frees us up. So I know one of you guys sent me an email saying that the guys from your group are talking through James so far, and at times it can read a little bit like another to-do list. And the last thing a dude needs is more to-dos to fail at. And so just remember, the whole point of this is that when we give our lives to Jesus, he begins to unbind us. That's part of the process. So he's freeing up our lives, and he's got to speak truth for us to get free. So the words that are written to us, we have to remember about 2,000 years ago, some of these words were written, and life was a lot less demure back then. Like, it was just more blunt, in your face. It's a little bit why wisdom literature sometimes reads like that, is that there's either life or death, or darkness or light. There's no in between. And so sometimes it will feel a little bit harsher and feel like a to-do list, but just remember, the spirit of this is to set us free. And we're getting into kind of a pretty hairy section this morning. So I'm going to just read this to you. We're in chapter 1, verse 13 through 16. It says, nobody being tested should say, or tempted, nobody being tempted should say, it's God that's testing me, for God cannot be tested by evil, and he himself tests nobody. Rather, each person is tested when they are dragged off and enticed by their own evil desires. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it reaches full maturity, will give birth to death. Isn't that encouraging? So obviously we've been talking about how men are like grass that grow up and then they wither and they come and they go, but the word of the Lord, it says in James, stands forever, or stands the test of time. And so right before we go into this section on sin, just remember that if there's anything that's proven true, it's that men that follow the temptations that they naturally have, if they don't subdue it at least a little bit or control it, it ultimately, most of the time, if not always, leads to some type of death or loss. And this morning, I just want to give you a little bit of a story. I don't know if I remember telling you this stuff before, but I'm old, 54, been in a lot of accountability groups my whole life. And I have found over the years that accountability groups only work if you're accountable. There's a little extra credit for you if you've joined a group thinking that just by being with some dudes talking nebulous stuff that it will fix all your deep-seated issues. It doesn't. That you can lie in an accountability group just like you could lie to yourself or anybody else around you. So obviously it's better to be with guys, but the point of what God does in our lives is that to free us up, he's got to get us with some mates that are open book and where healing can begin. And so I share a story of a good buddy of mine that came to me and two other friends who all travel, by the way, for their livelihood. And he said, hey, I've been struggling a little bit. I thought, it might be good for the four of us to get together and really talk through serious issues together. So it was coined that way. And I remember we all joked and we were like, yeah, whatever. And he's like, no, seriously, it's time. And we were all kind of late 40s, early 50s. He's like, it's time for us to come completely clean. And so we all bought in, and we committed, get this, we committed 1 day a month to be together for the full day. So from 6 a.m. we started early. So we want to rise together, do some devotions, and then we'd close the evening down with 10 p.m., just have a kind of a final nightcap together. But we would ask our wives for permission to spend the whole day together. And part of what we would do is that each one of us would get probably 2 to 3 hours of time just to talk about where we were really at and what we were struggling with, and then the other guys would speak into it. So in my 50 some years of life, this was the most life-giving men's thing I've ever been a part of, until that same guy that started the group that called for it, we caught him with a couple Russian prostitutes. And then things kind of changed. So don't want to, give you all the details, but we pursued him to try to save his life. We went after him without any sense of judgment. And that's really true. None of us, we were hurt, but we were not mad. I mean, we understand this is it, but we were a little bit jostled by the fact that he called for this, and still somehow he was not able to save himself in this story because he just wouldn't come clean. We actually confronted him with very clear truth and things that he had been caught in by his wife, and he denied everything. We actually went to a hotel where we knew one of the acts had happened, and we got the video footage from the hotel owner who knew the prostitutes, and even confronted him with the video, and still he said it wasn't what we were watching. That's not what was going on. And when we would not relent because of our great love for him, a little bit of the way the Lord does with us, he just keeps pursuing because he just wants to save and redeem. The only way that our friend could get out of it was to feign falling off of his deck at his cabin and bonking his head. We heard that he was in the hospital for a concussion, and when he came out, he said, "Look, I don't even know what we've been doing. Have you guys been coming after me? My wife says you've been coming after me." He's like, "Whatever might have happened," he goes, "I have no recollection of it anymore." And so that was the final play. He just said, "I can't remember anything anymore." And so there goes another guy, and one of my closest friends. So a lot of pain with that. And but it seems like if there's anything true, it's that men untethered and unhinged, without something of the Lord in their lives, are eventually maybe going to shipwreck everything. So he did. He shipwrecked his marriage and the reputation that he had with his older children. He lost his livelihood because his job was to talk about Jesus. And looking back, me and the buddies still talk about that all the time, because we actually know this guy does love the Lord. He actually loves the truths of the Lord. He loves teaching about it, but there's a real truth about this, is that you can believe a lot of things about Jesus and about faith, but still not live according to them. And that's why when Jesus talks about the work is to believe, he's really talking about a belief that deeply affects how we live. And there's no greater area to talk about than the issue of temptation. And what that is, it's sort of, this little passage is in the middle of talking about two types of snares. The first one, if you remember, was the snare of wealth. And these are the two biggies, like going after money and provision and materialism is a great snare that ties us up in knots and leaves us at the end of our lives going, why did we work so hard for that? And the other snare is this issue of temptation. And usually in the Bible, when it talks about temptation or testing, it's almost always referring to sexual testing, because after all, guys, what else is a dude tempted for? I was thinking about this the other day. What is something that every day, just like sexual and temptation, what is the other things that come along the way every single day at some point to hassle me? And the only thing I think of is ice cream and kettle chips, like late at night, about 10 p.m. watching Fallon, and it comes out of nowhere. I'm not thinking about it during the day. All of a sudden, the thought comes across as if to say, Halter, you need this. You deserve it. Nobody else will know you're doing it. And so I fall to this. But other than that, seriously, the sexual temptation, if a guy could get a good handle on what this actually is to get out of this temptation, it would change everything. So I just want to go through this and make a few points, because I wish we had more time. This is one of those where we need a couple hours. But let me dive into the biggies for you. It says, nobody being tested should ever say, it's God that's testing me, for God cannot be tested by evil, and he himself tests nobody. So when you're in temptation, especially repeated sinful temptation of sexuality, I know in most of my life, when a super attractive woman that's come across, I'll Go, well, why didn't you like divert her, send her through Samaria, get her out of my space? Like it is natural to actually blame God for when we're tempted. Because if we could blame him, then if we fall, it's his fault anyway. But clearly it says that's not the way he plays the game. God, get this, guys, God only deals with us, with humanity, based on his character. Okay? And his character is perfect holiness. Like he is for you. I guess the simplest way to say that is that God can never be against you. He is always for you. So he will always lead you into triumphal procession. He's never going to try to lead you into something that's going to take a pound of flesh out of your body. All right. So then where does temptation come from? Well, let's read on. It says, so nobody being tested should say it's God that's testing me, for God cannot be tested by evil, and he himself tests nobody. Rather, here it comes, boys, rather each person, so it's not that some guys struggle and other guys don't. It's that every one of us, each person is tested when they are dragged off, and enticed by their own desires. So apparently, we are the ones that lead ourselves into temptation. It actually doesn't even reference Satan or the enemy here. It actually almost as if we are the ones that mess up our own lives. I'm sure that Satan has, and his minions, that's the reality of scriptures, that there are beings that do try to make things harder for us, but it says here that we are tested when we are dragged away. It's a very vivid image, being dragged out of something. So what are we in? Colossians 3:3 came to mind as I was reading this today, where it says that we are hidden in Christ. In the Old Testament, it talks about when we're with the Lord, he actually envelops us under the shadow of his wings, that we're protected in the cleft of his wing, it says. So when you give your life to Jesus, you're actually brought into a big protective barrier from the world. So where would we be being dragged away from? We're being dragged away from the Lord. So, in John, it talks about abide in him and he will abide in you. And then ask whatever you wish and you'll be granted. Like when we're with him, there seems to be a power source that's there that enables us to live at a higher plane of life. But for sure, protection. So when our desires begin to spring up ice cream, kettle chips, a really attractive woman, we're literally pulling ourselves out of the Lord. And I think he just kind of has this free flowing, like, hey, you want to be with me? I got you. But I guess, yeah, if you want to go off for an hour or two and pursue this desire, then I guess have at it. There's one time in Scripture where Satan actually does come to Jesus and ask him if he can get the word sift Peter. Like he's actually asking God, like, I think I could take this guy out. You're going to base your whole church on this guy? I could easily take this dude out. And Jesus goes, have at it. And we're not sure why. Maybe to prove to Satan, maybe to prove to Peter. But it is a pretty inspiring thought to think that at certain times in our life, the enemy might actually come to the Lord and go, look, I don't think Halter's all that he says he is, and I could easily get him out of your movement. I would love it for the Lord to go, give it a shot. Like, I believe in this kid. He's proven himself faithful, but that's 401 level, right? Like for most of us, we just have to understand how temptation works and how we get dragged away by ourselves, and then what happens if we keep going. So let's keep going. So it's not God that's testing us, for God can't do that. Rather, each person is tested when they are dragged off and enticed by their own desires. And then desire when it's conceived. And conceived is, it's like it starts, it's birthed, it's fed, it's watered a little bit, it's given a little space. So when desire has been conceived, it gives birth to sin. Kind of interesting that in here, a man's desires are not sin. And the man himself is not sin. The sin is what begins to grow when we let our desires just run amok and we give them space and food and water and all that stuff, okay? So when you see a beautiful woman, or when a thought comes into your mind, you're not sinning in that moment, but you are beginning to, or at least you're in a scenario right then in that moment where you're going to either move towards life or you're going to move towards death, okay? And it's like a little spider that comes off the ceiling, and he sees us beginning to entertain a desire, and he just begins to spin a little web around our ankles. We can't feel it at first. And then all of a sudden, when it gets up above our knees, we're like, oh, we realize we're hooked a little bit. And oftentimes by then it's too late. I've found in my own life that if I let the desire go, I generally am going to lose. I can't win inside a fertile desire. Okay, I only win prior to letting that desire have food. So I either snuff it out immediately, or generally I'm going to lose. So that's something to keep in mind, guys. Really, most of the battle, it's not stopping desire from happening. It's moving the desire into any place where it can grow. And hopefully that on itself can help us a little bit. But then it says, so when that desire has conceived and it's given birth to sin, when sin reaches its maturity, it gives birth to death. So it gives this idea that sin just doesn't happen. It actually grows and it gets bigger. So my buddy didn't start with Russian prostitutes. Okay, that's not where it started. He started probably way back in the day. And we did find out he had a life of struggle with pornography, but he also had a life of struggle of living a private life out on the road, a lot of hotel rooms and nobody around, and the complete fertile ground to have a private life independent of everything he believed and taught about and whatever. And so this is a growing sin. It just kind of snowballs, and eventually it leads to something where you go, how could you be so dumb to get to that level? But that's how it gets there. And any of us could get to that point where you go, holy cow, how did that get there? Well, it's just giving that desire a little bit of room. Okay, and so when it gives birth to sin and it matures, it gives birth to death. So it doesn't give birth to a better life. It's just something dies. So for this guy, what died is his marriage. What died was his relationship with his kids. What died was his livelihood, his provision, and a whole host of other things, from self-esteem to, I don't know, you name it. A lot of things died. That's why sexual sin is warned about so much. There's a lot of sins you can goof around with, and they're not going to put a lot of hurt on you, but this one does. And there's not a guy out there that hasn't fallen and then lost all that stuff that doesn't go, I did that for 18 minutes of pleasure. Are you kidding me? But that's what the birthing process of the desire does. And so consider this. It says towards the end of this that you have a father and he's full of light and he gives good gifts to his kids. And then it says later on that we are like the first fruits of his life. So when you think about the witness of the difference in what Jesus does in our lives, one of the great witnesses is not that you are not going to struggle with temptation or desire. It's just that what makes a Christian man is that they don't stop fighting. They don't just give in. They don't just let the desire take root, that we fight the desire. And how do we do that? We call men around us, like my friend called us to, but we actually come clean. The primary way that we get healing through sexual sin, when it's become a sin, is now it's got its hooks in us, is we just have to actually tell guys. So that's the only difference in my friend and other men in my life, and in my own healing. The difference is we told some guys and we asked for help, and there is healing. Never perfect healing, but way better than it was, my friends. And so maybe this week, consider your own life, what you don't want to die. But I'll tell you, even your own desire for beautiful things in your life not to die, it still will not be a strong enough desire in that moment. Really, the battleground is in that moment, from right when you have a desire to when you fertilize it. And if we can just get some healing in that zone, if you can stay connected to Jesus and men that love Jesus, you will find that maybe years will go by and you'll go, this battle doesn't take me out anymore, like I'm winning this thing, or Jesus is winning this thing. So let's keep talking about this and have a lively conversation today about all this. You might as well come clean. None of these guys judge you. None of them think you're worse than them. There's not one that is pure in this. So you might as well, like if there's any life-giving thing in your weekly rhythm, it should be these men and telling them everything and asking for prayer and for healing. And hopefully we'll get on to something. So love you guys. See ya.